So let's go back to our earlier story where speakers at the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation Drakensberg Growth Forum have highlighted the importance of a strong democratic leadership, partnership and intra-Africa trade. And this is amid global policy uncertainty. Delegates heard that the escalating trade tariffs and protectionist policies have dampened global economic prospects. Let's link up now with SABC News reporter Naledi Ngcobo, who's watching developments on this front for us. So Naledi, I'm sure lots of conversations coming up about having, leadership that is strong. Talk to us about some of those conversations, and are these conversations ultimately likely to trickle to the ground where it matters the most?
Well, good morning, Mxolisi. Thank you so much for having me, and good morning to our SABC viewers. We are coming to you live from the Kgalema Motlanthe Inclusive Growth Forum happening here in the beautiful and picturesque Drakensberg Mountains. But serious conversations being had here, particularly about leadership, about democracy, and about economic growth. Of course, a number of headwinds that South Africa is facing from a global as well as a domestic point of view that essentially undermine the economic viability of our country. But of course, they're saying that there are a number of low-hanging fruits that can be taken advantage of to make sure that the economy remains intact. We know that we have a number of problems when it comes to trade, particularly given the 30% tariff that is coming from the US. But of course, they're saying that there are a number of things that we can do from a domestic point of view to strengthen our economic position, including trading within the continent with our African counterparts. But right now joining me is a chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Mmusi Maimane, who's also here, who's speaking about putting people first and what will be important as we go forward and we try to strengthen the economy. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Maimane. Putting people first, this is something that you're going to be speaking about later this afternoon. Can you just tell me a little bit of what is the sentiment that you're going to be putting forth as far as this event is concerned and these conversations are concerned?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And more importantly, I think when we think about citizens, we need to think about citizens as a collective. And so part of the conversation I'll be having today is that how do we, in a society that is fast fragmenting, with political leadership that keeps telling people to be divided on multiple biological features, whether those are race, how do we bring citizens together? How do we build that united South Africa? The second issue on the table will be to look at the fact that people fragment because of economic impoverishment. And so you can't sustain, when you argue the case that you want to put people first and entrepreneurial development, you fail to honor invoices on time. So there's an economic jobs argument that we'll put on the table. And then thirdly, citizens feel disconnected to political leadership fundamentally on a number of issues, that the elites become the political leaders. But the issue of corruption remains quite a serious one, when citizens feel like you are a special class of people who get away without consequence, and yet citizens themselves feel like they are living with the consequences of poor decision making. So when a hospital is looted, it's not the people who loot that suffer. It's eventually the patients who don't get medicines, etc. And so part of my address is that if you put people first, what are those guardrails that need to always be in place so that citizens can indeed be prioritized?
Right. I'm glad that you touched on the issue of corruption, particularly in the context that we are in at the moment. We are seeing some very fiery testimonies coming out of the Madlanga Commission, and that have gotten people quite riled up. Some of the things that were highlighted in the engagements yesterday was the importance of maintaining the rule of law, particularly in the context of attracting investor confidence and investment into the country. How important do you think that is, and for us to be maintaining that rule of law?
It is absolutely crucial, because the first thing that rule of law gives you is legal certainty. You know that there's cause and effect. Now, one of the most disturbing things is that the probability of you convicted for murder in South Africa is 1 in 5, which means you've got an 80% plus chance of getting away with murder. So that is a genuine case of making sure that people cannot invest in the country, because once that feeling is pervasive, it means you can't send staff, you can't put your business anywhere else. So that is a disincentive. But the second is that what the Reserve Bank governor raised so adequately was that the effects of the depreciation of the rand are not always on the trade of the rand itself, but in fact on other factors, and which crime is but one. And then thirdly, and which I think is a crucial issue, is that when we come down to legal certainty, so the idea that if you do things right, you should be acknowledged for that. People in communities and townships don't enjoy that. So once the courts are failing at a lower level, where people don't feel like they can gain maintenance, they can gain justice, they can get rights to land, etc., that undermines the broader infrastructure of the rule of law. And so it cannot be understated. Institutional capacity is the most fundamental thing that we've got to do. And perhaps the question about what the next budget must be, it must be a more explicit expression of how do we reinvest in the policing and building capacity within that, given the Madlanga Commission, but also given the fact that 89% of the police budget effectively goes into cost of employees, which means there's no investment in vehicles and in making sure law enforcement is actually effective at keeping the rule of law.
Right. And then another thing I think that's important to mention is that we're going towards the midterm budget policy statement very soon. And earlier in the year, of course, we had seen a lot of back and forth between various members of cabinet about what it is that it means to have consensus around the budget and what the priorities essentially must be. What do you think the important things will be that you'll be looking out for as we go towards this upcoming midterm budget?
Look, the biggest headache South Africa faces is that unemployment is sitting at over 32% on a narrow definition of unemployment. And so the only question on the table is how do you create jobs? And so one of the things I'll be looking for is where do we put investment, foreign direct investment, and how do we attract that? How do we attract domestic investment so that we can counter the ballooning debt burden that we're already beginning to put on citizens. The second and more worrying issue is the fact that for many people there's an inherent feeling that says that when we look at the budget, the delivery of basic services, even around areas like education, becomes limited because in essence the proportion of teacher to learner is already starting to rise. So you're seeing fewer and fewer teachers, but more and more learners, which means classroom sizes are bigger, particularly for poor citizens. And then on healthcare, the proportion of doctor to patient becomes one that is under stress. So if we're going to build an economy that works, let's educate our young people, let's keep investing in the safety of citizens, and ultimately ensure that South Africa lives in a place where more and more people have an appreciation of the fact that in essence the budget works for them rather than it is a protection of the elite.
And then just finally, before I let you go, a number of issues that we're facing that sort of threaten our stability when it comes to infrastructure. A number of infrastructure failures that we're seeing. We fixed the electricity situation, but now water has now become a problem. How important is it for us to now start thinking about how are we approaching our infrastructure issues in order to try and maintain and grow the economy, as it were?
Infrastructure locates itself in a municipality, and often the first starting point of decay is that municipalities sometimes are incentivized to produce vanity projects and fail in infrastructure maintenance. And that's a function of roads, that's a function of buildings, a function of bridges, bulk water systems, because at the end of the day, the reticulation of water is a competence of a municipality. And that is enforced in law, or the reticulation of electricity, for argument's sake. So therefore, in the light of that, we've got to strengthen municipal competence. If we fail to get the best municipal managers, the best councillors working to be able to give political oversight in municipalities, my suspicion is that we're going to end up with investment into infrastructure, but really poor consequences. And when you look at the metros all across the country, this is a collective crisis. But furthermore, the 1 trillion rand medium-term budget prioritization on infrastructure spend needs to be economic infrastructure, and therefore it requires the idea of asking ourselves the question, where are we putting infrastructure so that we can derive economic value? On matters such as rail, on matters such as signaling, how do we fix big institutions like Transnet and Eskom? How do we ensure that ultimately that on a national infrastructure, our dam capacity ensures that we can harness natural water, because that's the cheapest form of water you can sell to citizens, ensure that we transition energy so that we can build the right infrastructure and make sure our logistics work well. We fail at those three massive projects, I think we will undermine our economic growth. So now is a project of saying, if we build, let's build the right infrastructure. If we maintain, let's capacitate municipalities.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was a chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Musi Mayamani, giving us a bit of his ideas about, what's important in terms of maintaining our economic capacity and our economic competence, speaking to us about the importance of maintaining strong infrastructure, the importance of capable municipalities, and talking about how important the rule of law is in terms of our economic as well as our political capacity as well. But of course, there'll be a number of speakers here today. We're expecting Minister of Transport, Ms. Barbara Christie, to also make presentations today. We're also expecting Minister of Health, Mr. Aaron Mzweli, to be also speaking and engaging delegates at this event. But of course, we'll be bringing you all the engagements that are happening throughout the day. We've got a schedule that is chock-a-block lined up with many speakers throughout the day, as well as tomorrow. But for now, it's back to you in studio.